This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
Hello, I'm Melissa Raid, Chief Sustainability Officer of Sustain.Life, and this is the Week in Sustainability. This week, we have two newsworthy stories for you. First, starting off with CDP. Now that the 2023 reporting scores are out, we will walk you through some of the highlights of this last reporting season. And two, big news out of China this week, a new guidelines for exchange-listed companies to disclose sustainability information, including, of course, Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So let's dig into CDP first. Now, this initiative has been around since 2000, and the organization is a nonprofit based out of the UK with global reach spanning 50 countries. CDP is a very powerful platform for companies and governments to share and disclose their environmental performance. Now, why do the 23,000 companies that disclosed in the 2023 reporting cycle choose to do so? CDP is mostly driven by stakeholder requests, primarily investors requesting data from portfolio companies and distinct supply chain initiative of large enterprises requesting that same data from their suppliers. As regulatory requirements take shape across global jurisdictions, we see disclosure as a critical tool for achieving net zero targets, tracking progress towards our Paris Agreement goals, and providing robust data to inform the global stocktake. Now, CDP aligns with leading frameworks underpinning those regulations, things like the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, now, of course, codified in the IFSB's IFRS S1 and S2 sustainability and climate disclosures, which really enables companies to meet the regulatory requirements that are now evolving across global jurisdictions. CDP literally serves as the bridge between regulated disclosure and voluntary frameworks. And it's currently actually the prescribed reporting as well for some proposed laws, including the US rule for federal suppliers, which under this rule, it's the Federal Supplier Climate Risk and Resilience Rule, which would require major federal contractors defined as more than 7.5 annual contracts for federal customers to publicly disclose their Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, their climate-related financial risk, set science-based targets, and make those disclosures through CDP as the reporting mechanism. So CDP is survey-based. That also makes it very unique compared to some of these other voluntary frameworks. There's actual questions on a survey that you submit to and are then scored in your response. And there's distinct great themes across three different questionnaires. There's a climate questionnaire, a water questionnaire, and a forest questionnaire. And you get a score and a letter grade from A to D if you've disclosed. So let's focus on the 2023 scores. That's what we're all here for. A couple of high-level review by the numbers. So this past year, over 23,000 companies reported to CDP. Of those, 21,000 companies were scored. And of those scored, just under 400 met CDP's A list, which requires top performance across all three of those questionnaires. Now, these companies are recognized as global leaders in environmental transparency, and they represent only 2% of all CDP respondents. And I really want to focus on that word transparency because that's a very core theme and effort and focus of what CDP and all of these other disclosures are all about. It's not just about the data. They ask very detailed questions about the methodology, about the strategy, and that's why it's so critical for companies to understand not just the impact of their operations, but really how all of those numbers are calculated. Only 10 companies of all of those disclosing were awarded the very highest score of AAA. CDP is absolutely increasing in popularity. Reporting increased 24% in 2023 from the prior year. But important to note that the number of A-list companies grew only by 14%. And so what does that mean? That signifies that while more companies are disclosing to CDP, fewer are responding with the high quality and comprehensive data that makes you an environmental leader. The number of companies requested to disclose against all three questionnaires also triple from the prior year, as financial institutions and major buyers are really considering companies to take a more holistic approach to environmental issues and strategies and not segment them into these distinct disciplines. So that likely is what has influenced CDP's decision for the 2024 reporting cycle to combine all the questionnaires into a single survey for the 2024 cycle. CDP regularly reassesses what qualifies for an environmental leader. in line with best science, stakeholder engagement, and the market need, again, for greater transparency. And so companies should expect these reporting requirements to expand and strengthen every year. An example of this past reporting cycle, leading climate change companies had to disclose 100% their scope 1 and 2 emissions and have 100% of those emissions be verified. And that was an increase from the prior year's requirement for a leader in the space of only 70% verification across scopes 1 and 2. So as we see these regulatory requirements take shape globally, especially those that have limited and then reasonable assurance requirements, as well as the inclusion of scope 3 emissions, I would expect those verification requirements to evolve in upcoming reporting cycles. And so again, as companies out there look for solution providers and support systems to calculate their emissions and help with CDP reporting, it is critical to find solutions that are transparent, provide visibility into how emissions were calculated, and don't keep that data in a black box of their platform. This is all about visibility, transparency, and accountability. Okay, great for CDP. Now let's shift from that global perspective of reporting over to a more regional one, specifically the new sustainable reporting guidelines issued by China this past week. Now, over the years, ESG has become a hot topic in the Asia Pacific area. Governments, regulator, businesses, they are increasingly realizing the importance of environmental, social, and governance factors in decision making and investment strategy. So, investors pay really close attention to ESG performance, and they push organizations to disclose more ESG related information to attract new investment and build trust. With the recent release of the new global baseline, the ISSB, IFRS S1 and S2 standards, we're seeing a lot of countries in the Asia Pacific region navigate how to adopt that voluntary global baseline standard into their regulatory requirements. So, what are these new guidelines all about that we saw coming out of China? Now, mainland China's 3 main stock exchanges have released reporting guidelines for listed companies to disclose sustainability information. Now, this is from 3 primary exchanges. You have the Shanghai Stock Exchange, the Shenzhen Stock Exchange, and the Beijing Stock Exchange. And they all published separate guidelines on corporate sustainability disclosure that are now open for public comment. So these rules are not yet passed, but similar to what we see in all jurisdictions, what you saw in Europe, what you see in the US, what you saw I see in Australia, the government releases the proposed guidelines, collects feedback from a multi-perspective stakeholder approach, and then formalizes the rules. So these guidelines, like so many across the globe, anchor on the 4 pillars of TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, asking companies to disclose information across the 4 key themes or pillars of governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. Now, the guidelines from 2 of the larger exchanges, the SSE and the SZSE, would make reporting compulsory, required for companies listed in top performing indices like the SSE 180, the Star 50, the SZ 100s, and the Chi-Next, as well as all companies that are listed both domestically in China and abroad. And those compulsory requirements would start in 2026 for 2025 fiscal year data. So that's not too far. These guidelines include key topics beyond just emissions. It includes things like biodiversity, circular economy, and it really strengthens the existing requirements for companies to disclose carbon emissions. Companies also have to disclose their governance and strategies related to climate change, to climate adaptation, and they have to also disclose their transition plans if they have any in place, as well as emission reduction measures and opportunities related to carbon neutrality. So again, you see this pattern of disclosure requirements focusing not just on data and metrics, but on strategy and contextualization of how are you thinking about climate change? How does it materially, financially impact your business? And what are you doing to manage those impacts? Now, the BSC, that third exchange, which lists mostly smaller enterprises, is taking a slightly different approach, where they are right now encouraging, but not yet mandating, companies to disclose information in standalone sustainability reports. Now, they're characterizing the intent of this guidance, and this is language that should seem familiar to us all, as standardizing the information disclosure of listed companies, sustainable development, guiding listed companies to practice the concept of sustainability, and promoting high quality development of listed companies. So you can see this is really all about quality and progress. The release of these guidelines signals mainland China's determination to improve their economic sustainability, tackle climate change and environmental issues, and quite frankly, catch up to the global peers in ESG reporting. Now, while Europe still maintains the lead on mandated sustainability disclosure, the APAC region has had its fair share of activity as well over the past couple of years. So let's just spend a little bit of time contextualizing what we see in China against some of the other countries in the APAC region. Australia, for instance, their finance ministry proposed mandated climate-related financial risk reporting for large and listed enterprises. Again, these acronyms will sound familiar, aligned with ISSB's IFRS sustainability and climate disclosure standards, which, as a reminder, fully envelops the TCFD recommendations. Japan, also a very early and active adopter of the TCFD, and in 2021 actually revised their corporate governance code to mandate TCFD disclosures for prime market listed companies. And they did that in a comply or explain manner, which means comply with these disclosure requirements or explain why it is you don't think it's necessary to comply. So there's a little bit of an out there, but we do expect those requirements to tighten. The governments and the regulators review the why and make judgments on that didn't quite really make what we're talking about here. Also in Japan in 2023, they actually enhanced their rules. That 2021 requirement, they enhanced it by requiring all listed companies, including foreign issuers, I may add, to disclose again against the 4 pillars of the TCFD in a new section that was created in Securities Report. And that law impacts 4,000 companies. And that's pretty similar to what we see with the proposed SEC rule in terms of augmenting the 10K with new sections and requirements specific to climate-related financial disclosure. All right, so the last one we'll focus on Singapore. What's going on there? In 2021, Singapore's SGX exchange announced its plans for issuers to incorporate climate-related disclosures and sustainability reports based again on recommendations of the TCFD. So this approach was a little bit unique. It did maintain a phase-in approach based on its sector, and that is different from what we see in other countries. So there was mandatory reporting in 2023 for issuers specifically in financial, agricultural, food and forest products, and energy industries, followed by materials and building industries set to report in 2024. So that's a lot of information, but I think what's most critical about it is it's very indicative of what we're seeing across the global landscape in terms of regulated sustainability reporting. This is something that is not going away. We see a pattern of governments issuing proposals, seeking public comment, really wanting to work with industry and multi-group stakeholders to put in place the most practical laws. They often have top phase-in periods, again, focusing often on scope 1 and 2, then later including scope 3, building in requirements for assurance over time. And so for the companies on the line, if you're operating in these regions, I think the most important thing for you to take away is that these laws aren't going anywhere. It may take some time for all of the detail and the dust to settle, but what you should be doing, frankly, is getting your house in order. Companies are going to need to report their emissions and their climate-related financial risks. And so you want to start doing those efforts now, understanding the unique aspects of your business related to these topics so that when you are mandated to disclose, you're doing so with confidence, with security, and of course, to avoid greenwashing. So that's what we have for you today. Lots of details in the news. We will see you next week for another week in sustainability.
Sustain.Life is the leading and most comprehensive sustainability software on the market. To learn how we can help your company measure its emissions and take climate action, go to Sustain.Life. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this show on our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.